Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, an imam in the Israeli city of Lod arrested for incitement against police. Meanwhile, a highly controversial military practice practically ending overnight, much to the applause of rights groups worldwide. And finally, could our understanding of history be totally wrong? Archaeological researchers discovering an ancient love story between modern humans and Neanderthals. Syrian news agencies again alleging Israeli airstrikes destroying a Syrian army outpost in the Golan Heights. No casualties reported. The IDF, however, claiming to have seen local Hezbollah terror group officials in and around the outpost over the past month. If Israel is indeed responsible, this would be the first such action carried out under the new Bennett government. But it'd also be the latest in an allegedly very long list of strikes against Iran-affiliated groups in Syria and even in Iraq. Israeli forces long consistent in their promises to address all threats to the nation's sovereignty. Likewise, this coming after the IDF's continuing policy of responding to attacks from Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Multiple Hamas terror group facilities targeted this week in retaliation for explosive and incendiary balloons sent floating over the southern Israeli border. Moving on, the Israeli police have arrested this morning the Imam of Lod, Sheikh Yusuf Al-Baz. This after he posted a clip from the movie Wolf Creek, saying that attacking the police is the best way to deal with injustice. But this is not the first time that we've seen incitement coming from the direction of Imam Al-Baz either, as during Operation Guardian of the Walls, he was called on being the person who incited the riots that occurred in the city. But what's the line that the Imam crossed specifically? Where does freedom of speech end and incitement begin? And joining us to discuss is ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first of all, again, what exactly are the charges and where did they come from?
So charges are on the table is pretty much incitement against police forces. As we can see in the video itself, in the post on Facebook that was removed already, Sheikh Al-Baz actually took the video from the Australian movie Wolf Creek, which actually portrays the scene of how the hero himself kills two cops for not incitement, but for harassing him or whatever. And underneath it was the title, well, not the title, but the subtitles themselves that said that the best way to deal with injustice is pretty much that way of killing cops. Now that pretty much is a black and white incitement. I mean, on the table afterwards, it was right there on the table, clear as day. And because of that, immediately afterwards, a member of the religious Zionist list, Bezalel Smotrich, together with
Head of the list, really, yeah.
The head of the list, together with Itamar Ben-Gvir, which is known to be a right-wing extremist, ran to the new Interior Minister, the new Minister of Interior Affairs, Internal Security, Omer Bar-Lev, and did come to him and tell him that they have to open an investigation immediately.
All right, so what are the points, if we're playing devil's advocate here, for the Imam's defense? Where does his freedom of speech factor into this to this situation?
I mean, if you look on the table, it's not that he has so much for, because it is black and white right there on the table, saying that there is a problem with the cops, and he is encouraging incitement. But this is not the only case. I mean, we saw it during Guardian of the Walls, and that's why there's a very thin line of freedom of speech coming here. Because on the one hand, you cannot stop him from saying what he says in the mosque. It's religious talk. It's religious fight. He's not calling to actively attack people or go against them. He's just saying we have to fight our oppressors. At the end of the day, he's calling for freedom. He's not calling for a right-on activism and killing and protests.
Not outright, anyway.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that this is not the first time for Imam Al-Baz, but are there precedents for this type of case of incitement?
So the first precedent was set back in 2015 by actually the head of the northern branch of the Islamic Jihad movement, Sheikh Raed Salah, who was actually arrested because he incited for the first time after a long line of speeches throughout his history, where he was playing on the borders of freedom of speech, calling out fight against the oppression, protect Al-Aqsa. But only 2015 was the first time he ever dared to cross that line and call to actively attack and stop any Jews trying to come to the Temple Mount. Then again in 2017, also during those tensions, yet again they were straight out incitements and calling out on air, saying we have to defend Al-Aqsa. Go out and protest in the street and fight. And at the end of the day, we can't forget that Sheikh Elbaz himself is affiliated with the Northern Branch, which is actually not surprising during the history we see here. And that pretty much proves the point that we are going with a straight movement that does continue to incite against Israel. And that's why, of course, they were outlawed in 2015.
All right, so it does sound, at least on the surface, as a pretty open and shut case. Asaf Nissan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
In other news, the IDF is scrapping a controversial military practice in the West Bank, although it's unclear why the decision was made. Nonetheless, Israeli activist groups are applauding this change in policy. Hannah Rifkin reporting with more.
An unexplained change in policy announced by the IDF, putting a stop to nighttime intelligence mapping, also known as the infamous night raids of Palestinian homes in the West Bank. The practice, one of the most controversial carried out by the military in the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, is meant to gather intelligence about a home's occupants and layout in alleged efforts to counter terror. This, according to the IDF. Human rights groups believe, however, it serves no strategic purpose, only managing to intimidate and traumatize civilians. A report published by 3 activist groups in particular, Yesh Din, Breaking the Silence, and Physicians for Human Rights in Israel, calling the mappings, quote, arbitrary invasions of homes with no proven illegal or terror activity to prompt them. Therefore, Yesh Din, for one, calling the IDF's decision to end the practice very significant. Again, though, the IDF standing by its position and countering critical reports with a report of their own, saying that the missions carried out are, quote, not random operations and are, quote, intended for operational intelligence purposes. The IDF also clarifying that there are strict protocols in place to, quote, minimize the effect on residents' quality of life. And the report adding that nighttime mapping would indeed continue, but only in, quote, exceptional circumstances. Hannah Rifkin, ILTV.
Moving on now to politics. Opposition parties led by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu already making good on their promises to try and doom the new coalition. Netanyahu's Likud party filing a motion of no confidence against the Bennett-Lapid government just 3 days into its tenure. And the bill, set for vote this coming Monday, offers an alternative right-wing coalition while charging that the newly sworn-in unity government was, quote, established on lies and defrauding the public and has no public mandate. That said, though, the motion will need at least 61 votes, or 51% of the Knesset, to pass, which the Likud is not expected to have. Parties in the opposition, including the Likud under Netanyahu, the Ultraorthodox Shas and United Torah Judaism parties, the far-right Religious Zionism Party, and the predominantly Arab Joint List, which was not even included in the opposition faction's meeting held earlier this week. In related news, for the first time in 8 years, since 2013, Israeli ultra-Orthodox parties are in the opposition, though they're not there quietly, with many laws important to them expected to change under the new Bennett-Lapid coalition. In any case, here to discuss is Rabbi Dov Halbertal, former head of the Office of Israel's Chief Rabbi, and Jeremy Salton, political strategist and director of English operations for the Yamina Party under Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Now, both of you, thank you so much for being with us. Among the Haredi Party's fears are changes to requirements for army service, cuts in subsidies to religious seminaries or yeshivas, and shifts to the balance of authority between religion and state, particularly in matters such as marriage, divorce, and even death. Rabbi Halbertal, what do you think the ultra-Orthodox are most worried about?
They are worried about everything altogether. I mean, the changing of the atmosphere, the changing of the Jewishness of the state of Israel. I mean, the new coalition is reducing, minimizing the Jewishness of the Jewish state by wanting to enact new laws and by renewing secular values and Western values instead of Jewish values. So it comes that it's a problem of an atmosphere altogether. It's a problem of changing, I would have said even revolution in the status quo of Israel since Ben Gurion. And we will come, I mean the state of Israel, will become much less Jewish and much less democratic.
So back in 2013, when the Haredi parties were in the opposition last, did similar fears come true, or was there perhaps a lot of fear over what might happen that was found to be unfounded? Rabbi Halbertal.
It's very difficult to answer to this question. It's an unprecedented situation that never occurred here in Israel. I mean, in so many fields, the agreements of the coalition are against the status quo, as you mentioned before. And I think that they will do it. They will do it. In two things, they will not succeed. In taking force to the army, the Haredi students, they will not succeed. They will not succeed to bring in core studies to the Haredi education, but they will succeed in other fields, in conversion, probably in changing the Shabbat publicly in Israel, and changing the law of marriage. And I think they can succeed. They will succeed even in changing the sort of rabbis, more liberal, more reforms, and
So Rabbi, pardon me for interrupting. Jeremy, I want to turn to you. How do you respond to some of the rabbis' allegations, including the new government attacking the Jewishness of the state or reducing Israel's Jewish values? Does the new coalition have any plans or coalition agreements that are unfavorable to the Haredi sector in your eye?
You know, I just find it to be very disappointing. This is actually a time for celebration. For the first time in Israel's history, the prime minister of the state is a person who is wearing a kippah. He is a religious man. For the first time since the Second Temple period, the leader of the Jewish people is a religious figure. You know, these are reasons to have celebration. Yes, that's true. The ultra-Orthodox parties are currently in the opposition. We maintain contacts with them. I wouldn't be surprised if within the current, coming months, perhaps after we pass the state budget, that at least the UTJ party does end up joining the future coalition. Let's put things in context here. During that 2013-2015 time where the Haredi parties were in the opposition, they did not see any of the things that they cried out actually happen. And of course, if we look at the time in which Tomi Lapid, who his decrees, if you will, and his threats against the Jewish character of the state far surpass anything that was written in any one of these coalition agreements, when he was in the government under Sharon, so of course Gafni of the UTJ party had no problem making sure that the budget would go through and propping up that government, even with the price of the disengagement from Gaza. So I think, historical context is important when it comes to these issues. As for the actual things that we're dealing with at this time, the three areas in which we are going to see reforms is one within the area of conversion, second within the area of kashrut, and third within the area of changing the way that the chief rabbi is chosen. Now, in both conversion and kashrut, we're talking about within the spectrum of orthodoxy having changes here. We're not talking about bringing in conservative or reform into the conversion or the kashrut process. There is a spectrum within orthodoxy, and I understand that the ultra-Orthodox prefer that everything be on their side, but that's just not a reflection of what a majority of the Israeli people would like to see. And as long as it's in orthodoxy and it's within halacha, it's going to be very hard for them to find support for their positions on these issues. And when it comes to changing the chief rabbi selection committee so that it's easier for a Zionist rabbi to be the one who's representing the state of Israel, I think, again, it'll be very difficult for them in the Zionist state to try to find people, even within the Likud, who they're currently aligned with, that will support that position, that the chief rabbis should not be people who are Zionist and view the current state as part of the redemption of the Jewish people.
All right, so Rabbi, I want to turn back to you. Jeremy just mentioned the close contacts that the coalition is maintaining with the Haredi parties. Do you think that there is a chance, that there is a topic where the Haredi parties actually can support or can get behind some of these changes with respect to maybe being more inclusive to other Jews and to Zionist Israelis?
They cannot support any of those changes. It's not so innocent. He told Jeremy like it's in the frame of the Orthodoxy. Not at all. The changes of the kashrut, the changes of conversion. It will be much liberal. It will be towards the reforms. It will be a disaster. By the way, he's saying about the benefit.
Well, may I ask where you're getting these concerns from, though? Have you seen in agreement, or do you have any sort of evidence to suggest that what you're saying is true, that reform influences are going to come in as opposed to Orthodox?
I know the agreement. I know they want to take the kashrut out of the Rabbanut Rashit and give it to everybody that has some criterions in it. It's unbelievable. The people here in Israel will not eat kosher outside. It's a disaster, And they want to give the way of or the process of converting to every chief rabbi in a city that can be a reform, a liberal, even unreligious.
All right, Jeremy Salton and Rabbi Dov Halbertal, thank you both so much for joining us. All right, now Israel's new coalition officials are trying hard to repair the public's trust in government that they claim has greatly suffered under former Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Defense Minister Benny Gantz among the most active in this mission. Defense Minister and leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, officially requesting to reveal the minutes from coronavirus cabinet meetings held over the course of the past year. In the letter addressed to Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on Wednesday, Gantz arguing that the new coalition was formed on the idea of improving public trust in government, as well as in elected representatives. And the letter adding that lifting the 30-year gag order on the COVID cabinet's minutes would accomplish this goal by better exposing the public to cabinet decisions and ministers' conduct. And this especially after Gantz made a similar request to former Prime Minister Netanyahu back in February, which Netanyahu denied. The 30-year gag order was installed following an amendment to government protocols, and all partial revelations from the COVID cabinet discussions then so far coming through repeated leaks to the public. Meanwhile, aside from transparency in government action, Gantz also vying to regain public trust in other areas, including the proposal for an official government investigative committee into the Mount Meron disaster on Lag BaOmer, in which 45 people were crushed to death, and appearing to stay open about Israel's security policies and status. Gantz tweeting about his morning discussions on Iran, strategic support for Israel, and more with senior U.S. administration and military officials, as well as with a delegation from JINSA, or the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. Likewise, Gantz also meeting recently with U.S. envoy to Israel Michael Ratney and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, among others. Many critics of the new coalition, for their part, however, still arguing that Israel is endangered by left-wing and Islamist officials who critics say are weak on security. And now our final topic tonight, an ancient love story just recently revealed by Israeli archaeological experts. The researchers publishing evidence found in the Israeli Negev desert of a 50,000-year-old meet-cute between Homo sapiens, or modern humans, and their Neanderthal cousins. Proof that the two species apparently not only intermingled, but may have reproduced. And of course, to provide us with all of the details, I'm joined now for the latest installment of Can You Dig It? With Israeli tour guide Anat Harel. Anat, it is a pleasure to have you back with us. Where did Neanderthals come from exactly, and what were they doing in the Negev desert?
Hi, Aaron. So nice to see you again. So we have to go back about 1,800,000 years ago, when Homo erectus was the first hominid that walks out of Africa, all right? So they walk out of Africa and they spread into Europe and they spread into Asia and eventually to Australia. And that's where they live for over 1 million years, evolving and evolving. And eventually some of the branches become the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals start about 250,000 years ago, mostly living in Europe and Asia. Eventually, they make their way down south into the Levant, and that's where we live, right? We are on the Eastern Mediterranean, and we in Israel have found remains of the Neanderthals up to about 50,000 years ago in Israel. And so what happens is that eventually, in Africa, there's another group of hominids who start evolving and they become modern humans. They leave Africa about 60 to 70,000 years ago and make their way north. And what happens is that the Neanderthals, who have no connection to the modern humans, eventually meet up right here in our little tiny piece of land. We are the crossroads between these continents. We are the crossroads between Africa, Europe, and Asia.
So is that unity, or is that meeting really unique to Israel then?
Yes, it is the only place in the world where we have now concrete proof that Neanderthals actually met Homo sapiens sapiens, modern humans, and they lived together in the same places, and they even interbred. They coexisted. They shared probably cultural aspect, inventions, and all that stuff. And they interbred. And what's exciting about the find near Sde Boker, near Kibbutz Sde Boker in the Negev, is that it's the southernmost place where we have concrete evidence that Neanderthals and modern humans actually met and lived in the same area together for about 6,000 years. Carbon-14 evidence of that. Only place in the world where we can actually show it scientifically.
All right, so
it is. It's so cool.
Can you give me a little bit more information about the proof that there was some sort of love story here? Because you're saying that we believe they have some cultural overlap, that they probably live together, but where's the love story come from?
You say love story. I haven't seen anything that says love story. You're just a romantic, Aaron. But the thing is, what happens is we know that I believe, and now I'm not an expert at this, but I believe there are some groups of modern people around the world that carry about 2 to 3% of Neanderthal genes. We carry the Neanderthal genes in us. It's proof that we actually interbred. Now we know about 50 to 60,000 years ago. Wow. And we know that this happened starting in the Negev. We also, in Israel, we found Neanderthal and modern humans living together in the caves of the Carmel Mountains, near the riverbanks of the Kishon River near Haifa. All right, but this is the southernmost part, and they actually have more modern ways of carbon dating this. So this is the most concrete scientific proof that they live together. Now, we know that they interbred because we today carry some genes from Neanderthals who ended up going extinct about 40,000 years ago around the world.
Anat Harel, this is an incredible discovery, and thank you so much for giving us some more information about it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
All right, Aaron. So it looks like, unfortunately, we're going to have a bit of a cloudy weekend, but it's not the summer without some sun, so we have some of that mixed in. Tonight's lows are pretty warm in the central and southern areas at 21 degrees Celsius, and temperatures a bit lower at 16 degrees in the north. Then moving into Friday and Saturday, meteorologists calling for highs in the 20s and 30s, depending on where you are in the country. Shabbat Shalom, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Hannah. Now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Aw, if I'm seeing this correctly, I think that donkey is helping the other donkey cross the road. This sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's cute, so I'm not going to make one. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.26 shekels to the American dollar and 2.65 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.